on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest is Paul Barrett. His book is called Glock, The Rise of America's Gun. We want to look at how Hollywood deployed the Glock. The Glock pistol has been referenced in many Hollywood films and songs. Let's turn to a clip from the film U.S. Marshals featuring Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Downey Jr.
Take off your sunglasses. Why? So I can see your face.
Hi.
How'd you pull this duty?
Your fugitive murdered two of my friends. I volunteered.
You ever make a fugitive arrest before?
No, planning to shortly.
You have a weapon?
Yeah, a big one. How about you?
You sure you want to get cute with me? You have a backup weapon?
Never had the need.
Get one. Keep that in your suit unless I tell you to take it out.
Get yourself a Glock. Lose that nickel-plated sissy pistol.
Okay, people, let's move on this John Doe. I'm not having any fun here. You know how cranky I get when I don't have any fun.
Paul Barrett, Hollywood deploys Glock. Talk about how it was publicized.
Within just a few years of its appearance here, sophisticated Hollywood prop masters, the guys who decide which weapon to put in the actor's hands, realized that the Glock was catching on. And because they're good at their job, they started casting the Glock, just as we just saw. And screenwriters realized that the Glock was a very evocative name and was beginning to symbolize this kind of tough, everyman image that you saw Tommy Lee Jones reflecting there. I mean, get rid of your nickel-coated sissy pistol, get yourself a Glock. That's a man's gun. And this is priceless advertising for any product, and especially for a gun. And the amazing thing is, Glock didn't even have to pay for this. All they had to do was make sure that they would deliver the guns to the prop masters. They'd put it in for free. So product placement with guns, it turns out, costs you zero.
Well, that's the amazing thing when you think about the arms industry and, and all of these large companies. And here you have this company that came out of nowhere to develop this gun. And you talk about you start the book with that famous the worst day in the history of the FBI, right, when a shootout occurred in Florida, as I recall, and several FBI agents were killed. And how true was this viewpoint of law enforcement that they were being outgunned by the criminals, and how much of that was really urban hype to justify new acquisitions of weapons?
There was truth and hype. There was both. A number of the agents who were involved in that notorious gunfight, April 1986, the Miami shootout, did come armed with Smith & Wesson revolvers, and they did, in the heat of battle, find it difficult to reload their weapons, and that probably did heighten the number of casualties. On the flip side, there was some hype to it, too, because that wasn't the only problem. This FBI rolling stakeout squad, as brave as they were, they arrived for this fight ill-prepared. Several of them didn't wear armored vests. They could have brought military-style weapons. They knew they were going after a couple of homicidal maniacs. And so,
who were both veterans of special operations in the military.
Who both had advanced military training, which made them much more lethal as well. So the mythology that surrounds that incident is exaggerated. So there's both truth and myth. And, you know, the notion that police get into these massive gunfights all the time is, of course, exaggerated. The typical police gunfight at that time involved 2 or 3 rounds, so that if you had a Smith & Wesson revolver, 6 rounds would generally be enough. But on the other hand, cops want to feel confident on those rare occasions when they are confronting genuine bad guys, and that's why the semi-automatic pistol with the 17-round magazine was appealing to them.
Paul, go back in time. Just give us a quick thumbnail sketch of the history of the Glock.
Sure. Well, the Glock shows up here in the mid-'80s, as we've said, appeals to the police departments in very short order. But crucially at that point, it is opposed by name by gun control advocates. When the Glock showed up here, the late muckraking columnist Jack Anderson wrote a series of columns that were syndicated in hundreds of newspapers. Congress held hearings for more than a year about the Glock, about the plastic pistol, which it was alleged would be able to defy airport security because it was plastic, not metal. Now, it turned out that this too was a myth, because X-ray machines can pick up a big hunk of plastic shaped like a gun, just like they can a hunk of metal. In any event, if it's a magnetometer, the slide on the Glock, the big piece of steel on top, is detectable. And finally, if you're going to do any damage with a Glock, you need bullets, and the bullets, of course, are metal. So this allegation was a very ill-conceived attack on the Glock by gun control advocates, whatever your politics are. And so what happened was the Glock, in the space of a couple of years, became notorious and famous. And then the federal government said, and actually, we have no security concerns about the Glock, and it flooded onto the market. Here in New York, the Glock was banned by name by the New York Police Department from 1986 to 1988. No one could have one, cop or civilian, until it was reported by the AP and then the New York Post that the top cop, Benjamin Ward at the time, the police commissioner, was himself carrying a Glock under his suit coat. No one else could have one, but he wanted one. Within a couple of weeks, the New York Police Department dropped its ban, and within a couple of years, the New York Police Department, the largest department in the country, was carrying Glocks.
But there was a debate even then over the fact that the Glock, that officers tended to fire more shots because they had the capacity to do that,
yes.
And also that accidents occurred more frequently among police officers than with a revolver.
Absolutely, and those are really kind of two separate issues, but both very important. On the accidents front, there is no doubt that when the Glock was introduced, particularly in police departments where it was being introduced in large numbers all at once, they had problems with accidental discharges. There was even a phenomenon known as Glock knee or Glock leg, which referred to an officer grabbing the gun, putting his finger on the trigger immediately, and because the trigger pull is very light, shooting himself in the leg or the knee. Most famously recently, the professional football player Plaxico Burress did exactly that with a Glock in a nightclub.
Something you can't do with a revolver.
It's much harder to do with a revolver. Not impossible, but the trigger pull on a revolver might be 10, 12 pounds, with the Glock 5 pounds. So there's a huge difference. So that was a problem until police departments improved training and really taught their officers to never put your finger on the trigger unless you're about to shoot. So that's one issue. It was a real issue. It has diminished over time. The mass shootings of many, many rounds, that remains an issue today. I mean, the Sean Bell case, the Diallo case, I mean, this is something that persists to this day. It's no longer unique to the Glock because other companies make these same sorts of weapons now, sort of Glock knockoffs. And I think that's a legitimate debate. Again, a training issue that police officers have to learn not to panic and fire all those rounds. But that's something that the police departments have to pay attention to.
We just interviewed Colin Goddard on Democracy Now!, one of the survivors of the shooting in 2007 at Virginia Tech that left 32 people dead. He now works with the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Control. He was featured in the film Living for 32, and I asked him about the power of the National Rifle Association.
Well, I've only had a limited experience on Capitol Hill, but it's been disheartening to learn of the large number of our elected officials that have the interest of another big business organization, the gun manufacturing industry and their NRA, the lobbyist group, much more in high priority than the interest of the average American citizen who is getting shot and getting killed by these guns at a rate much higher than any other modern industrialized country. And I think, you know, a lot of the power is perception and what you perceive power to be and how much power the NRA has. But at the same time, you know, we've also been building in states across the country about this issue of, you know, doing background checks on everybody. I think a lot of Americans already think that we do background checks on everybody and are surprised to learn that we don't. So what we have to do is educate people and say, look, this is happening. This is legal. Do you want this to be legal? Is this something that makes you feel safe when guns are being sold to complete strangers with no background check? At the minimum, we should be doing a background check. And from my experiences taking the film across the country and speaking in different events, and even speaking last night, a lot of people think that, you know, background checks are something we need to do on all gun sales.
That's Colin Goddard, who now works with the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence. Paul Barrett, the power of the NRA.
The NRA, for my dollar, is the most effective lobbying organization in Washington, period, end of story. They are able not only to, at this point, block any new gun control at the federal level. Nothing is happening. Nothing's going to happen anytime in the future. But they also have the ability to activate their members at the local level to operate in individual states, to knock down congressmen who defy them, and potentially to create problems, for example, in the 2012 presidential election for President Obama. I mean, it's a real question whether in certain key states like Pennsylvania and Ohio, which are swing states, but also big gun states, big hunting states, whether he'll have a problem with NRA activists at the grassroots level. They're very effective.
And the issue of to what degree, not only for police departments, but for the general public and those who might be prone to gun violence, this increases the lethal capacity of any deranged individual who's using a Glock versus other types of guns.
Well, the idea that firepower has increased is beyond debate. The idea that the American gun market is now permeated by these large capacity magazines, no argument. That's just a fact. And I think that contributes to the likelihood that when a psychopath decides to do his evil work, he's going to have a tool that's more effective. What's important, though, I think, is to separate that, a horrible social problem, from lawful gun ownership. The fact that a particular guy likes to keep large magazines in his basement and never does any harm with them, we need to sort those things out. We need to sort out the crime problem, and then we need to sort out the anomalous crime problem of the mass shootings from figuring out how to allow people who are law-abiding and who practice gun safety from owning what they want to own.
I mean, isn't, for example, the automatic weapons ban that was sunset under Bush and has never been revived?
Correct.
Very clear-cut case. I mean, not even hunters use automatic weapons to go after.
Well, you got to be careful with this. That was the so-called assault weapons ban involved semi-automatic weapons. Automatic weapons or machine guns are still illegal. You can't walk in and buy them. Semi-automatic weapons just means a rifle that has a magazine, and each time you pull the trigger, it fires a bullet. The assault weapons ban was a really poorly crafted piece of legislation. It purported to ban these military-style rifles, but it only banned 19 types of them by name, and it left all kinds of loopholes. It grandfathered in all the existing equipment that was already on the market. And, for example, Glock, which was potentially affected by the assault weapons ban because it also banned large-capacity magazines, anything over 10 rounds. Well, Glock saw this law coming from a mile away. They ran their factory 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years before the law was actually elected, and they had a huge stockpile of exactly the equipment Congress tried to ban, which then flooded the market as soon as the ban came into effect. So if you're going to pass gun control laws, you have to make sure that they actually can accomplish what they set out to do.
Fast and Furious, the program that has gotten the Obama administration a lot of trouble. Yeah. Explain it and how Glock fits in with the story.
Right. Fast and Furious, of course, is the misbegotten investigation in Arizona involving the ATF, where the ATF allowed gun traffickers to buy military-style rifles for the most part and take them across the border into Mexico. A couple of these guns turned up at the murder site of a Border Patrol agent, and has been very embarrassing for the Obama administration. There are some pistols, some handguns in the mix there, but that's mostly a story about these military-style rifles that are preferred by the Mexican gangs. And so Glock has not really itself, as a brand, been touched by that scandal. But that's a terrible situation that raises very serious questions, I think, about the competence of the ATF.
And you raised earlier the rise of knockoffs of the Glock by American manufacturers. Yes. What has been the response of the big gun companies here, Smith & Wesson, Colt, and the others, to this rise of the Glock?
At first, they were disdainful, and that was very much to their commercial disadvantage, because they basically lost a huge chunk of the market, just the way Detroit lost a huge chunk of the market when they ignored the threat from Japanese and other import cars in the 70s and 80s. Then they tried to imitate it, and Glock immediately sued Smith & Wesson for patent infringement and was successful, and Smith & Wesson had to back off. And then finally, they basically matched it in quality. And today, just to stick with Smith & Wesson produces a gun that, to the non-gun person's eye, looks an awful lot like the Glock. And I'm told by people who know more about the technology than I do that it's just as good. It's called the Smith & Wesson M&P, and M&P stands for military and police. Again, you can see Smith & Wesson trying to appeal to that same tough law enforcement military aura that Glock has done so well to capture.
Gaston Glock was, well, someone attempted to assassinate him. Explain what happened and who he is.
Glock, the company, has been shot through with intrigue and controversy since very early on. This company made a ton of money It was run by Gaston Glock, the founder, and while he was quite a good engineer, he was not so great on the management side. He chose, for example, a financier from Luxembourg to set up shell corporations for him all around the world to minimize taxes, a very common international global corporate practice. GE, of course, is the best known for that so-called transfer pricing gambit. Anyway, Glock wanted to do it too. It turned out, however, that the shell company artist, whose nickname was Panama Charlie because he did so much work in Panama, it turned out he set up a few extra shell companies so that he could siphon off some of Glock's profits to himself. Glock found out about this, went to Luxembourg to confront him, and his financier arranged for his contract assassination. Unfortunately, it was about the worst contracted hit I've ever read about.
You mean he tried to use a Smith & Wesson?
No, he didn't try to use a Smith & Wesson. Worse than that, he hired a former French legionnaire and retired professional wrestler who confronted Glock in an underground parking garage and began bashing him on the head with a rubber mallet. The plot was apparently to make it appear that Gaston Glock had fallen down a flight of stairs in this garage and that there had been no assassination at all. Anyway, Glock, 70 years old at the time, is a very tough old bird. He fights back. When the cops arrive, they find these two older gentlemen sprawled on the floor of the parking garage, and Glock has survived. The financier who tried to have him whacked is now in maximum security prison in Luxembourg.
Paul, you were banned from the gun show. Where does it take place and why?
The SHOT Show, the Shooting, Hunting, Outdoor Trade Show, takes place every year in Las Vegas. And Glock, for whatever reason, is not so thrilled about the appearance of my book. And while I attend this trade show on a regular basis and am issued press credentials on a regular basis, the company succeeded in getting my press credentials rescinded this year so that I didn't have the little press tag that would allow me to go onto the exposition floor. Which, of course, just like so many things, when you try to censor somebody, it only encourages them to be more aggressive. And believe it or not, I got done what I needed to get done in terms of seeing my gun industry contacts. And in fact, there was quite a bit of outrage at the trade show over the fact that Glock had tried to ban me. So as far as I'm concerned, they really kind of did me a favor.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Paul Barrett, for joining us. He's author of the book Glock, The Rise of America's Gun. He's assistant managing editor of Bloomberg Business Week. If you'd like a copy of today's show, you can go to our website at democracynow.org.